Hey everybody, my name is Ted Forbes and welcome back to another episode of The Art of Photography, and today we are talking about part 2 in our printing series. And in case you're wondering what the heck I'm talking about and you haven't seen the other episode yet, we're basically going to take two paths to making a print and kind of compare them and see what the differences are. And really, I think the important takeaway here is less of a technical perspective, but it's more like, you know, what options do you have as a photographer, as an artist, from taking an image to something that's a pre-visualized thing that you're trying to create into the final print, and what are those steps in between. And so what we've done is I've taken some negatives that I made on a medium format camera, and we're going to do, well, we've already done the first, we're going to do two paths to get to a final print. Now last week what we did is we scanned those into the computer and we digitized them, and we went with kind of this hybrid analog digital process where they were taken into Photoshop, manipulated, cleaned up a little bit, and I've sent them off to Adorama to be printed, and they are going to come back, and when they do we will contrast them with what we're talking about today, which is going to be the analog darkroom process. So we did the digital thing last week. Today we're going to do darkroom, and I've got some examples and some things I want to show you. Real quick before we get going, one thing I want to mention is my darkroom setup. I'll put a link in the show notes because we've done a whole show on this before, but I call it the Minimalist Darkroom Setup. And really, I don't have a dedicated space for a darkroom, and you can see it's a little blurry behind me, but I have a Bessler enlarger that I can do anywhere from 35mm to 4x5 sheets of film on. And I have that sitting on top of a metal cart that was found at IKEA, and I keep all of my supplies in there, all my trays, all my paper, my chemicals. And what we do is when it's time to print, I can wheel that into my bathroom, which is large enough to accommodate. I've got enough counter space where I can put my trays out, prepare those, and turn the lights out and go. And when I'm done, I can clean it up and bring it back out again. And that's a really nice setup. It works well for me. My point is that you don't need a fancy setup to do darkroom printing with. A lot of this stuff people are getting out of these days because of everybody finally moving over to digital for the most part. So if you are interested in darkroom equipment, you can usually find things at very, very good prices. And we're dealing with silver gelatin black and white process for both of, well, digital was the other one. Today we're dealing with silver gelatin. And I want to talk about what your options are. Now, when you scan an image into the computer, as you saw last week, you have limitless options almost. And in fact, it seems like as the years go by, Photoshop just presents more that you can do with an image. And you know, Adobe does a wonderful job of making that software to where it's easier for you as a photographer to get clean results the way you want them. Now, having said that, I want to look at what some of our options are in the darkroom. We obviously don't have the digital possibilities of creating layers and adjustments and burning and dodging with the paintbrush, and it's a lot more analog than that. There are fewer options, but I really believe that if you understand how they work together and how to use them, they actually give you quite a bit of flexibility. In fact, just as much as you would in a digital situation. So I want to talk about these, and then we're going to go in and I'm going to show you some things. But basically the elements that you're dealing with occur on different levels. And I think on the paper level, depending on your paper selection, we'll break this down. You can control contrast that way, obviously, and a little bit of tonality. You can have things that are warmer tones or cooler tones, and I'll talk about that in a second. The other tool that you have at your disposal is the ability to burn and dodge. And literally what that is using your hands or various little tools to either mask out light on various areas to keep them from being processed or developed further or exposed, or using your hands to create places to burn to give more exposure to certain areas. So if you need to control the tonality of your image that way, where it's contrast, but it's very specific, there's something that you need to be lighter than it is on the exposure, or there's something that needs to be darker than it is in the exposure just in relative to the rest of the image. And we're going to look at that in a second for burning and dodging. And then the last thing we have talked about a couple shows ago, which is actually you are able to tone your prints if you're doing black and white. And we did some conventional household organic items, toning with tea and coffee, but you know, you have options there too. So those are really the options that you've got. Now, before we get cooking, I want to talk about paper a little bit. And we've talked about this, it's been quite a while on the show, but with paper, you do have a lot of options that really dictate what the final look is going to be. There's resin-coated papers, there's fiber-based papers. Obviously, they're going to have a difference in feel and texture that do affect the way the image looks. I tend to prefer fiber-based myself. It just has a richer quality to it. It's more difficult to work with because the paper curls something fierce, and you have to deal with that when you're framing or getting it ready for presentation. But it's a very beautiful, beautiful paper. The other thing that you can deal with paper is some papers lean towards warm tone papers, and some are more cool tone papers, and some papers are more neutral. and it depends on what you like. Personally, I like warm tone papers. It's just a look that I like. The whites have a little bit of a warmer tint to them. They're not tinted as much as like coffee or tea would do, but it's just a subtle tinting of that, and it also lifts the shadows so the blacks don't seem as just dead black as they would in something that's colder tone. Now, if you go to the other extreme and you're talking about cold tone papers, the whites tend to be very white, very bright, very clean, and sometimes the darks in you know, worst case scenarios can turn almost like a bluish quality to them, if not directly black. And it's just a matter of taste. Some people like cold tone papers, some people like warm tone papers. And I think in our example today, one of these images could be a cold tone image. And so it just depends on what kind of work you do, what you want to work with, you know, how you can use that to your advantage. The other thing I want to talk about paper and what I'm doing today with these is back in the old days of silver gelatin paper process. Papers, it used to be you just buy them rated at a certain contrast. So if you needed more contrast in your image, you needed to switch to a higher contrast paper. That's how that was controlled. And years ago, Ilford developed, I believe it was Ilford, correct me if I'm wrong, developed a system of multi-grade papers. And pretty much you could still buy graded papers, but multi-grade papers are very easy to find nowadays. And basically what that entails is I've got a box of filters, and the paper acts with these filters. And these filters, this is the Ilford set, and they are numbered, they go up in half-step increments, so it's 0 to 5.5 at the top. So you go 0, 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, etc. Usually around somewhere between 1 to 2 is going to be normal contrast on something. So if you really don't need to control much contrast, I might grab a number 1 or a number 2 filter. And they all kind of look purple-ish or pinkish. We're not printing in color, but these affect contrast. And so this sits literally in a little tray right underneath the enlarger lens, and the light is projected through this filter. If I need less contrast, I will go with a lower number, like a 0 or a 1/2. If I need higher contrast, you can go way up until you have really high contrast images. So that is one way that I like, that if you're dealing with multi-grade paper, which we are today, you can control your contrast a little bit. And if you want more contrast, you can control that. If you want less, you can use a different filter. So anyway, so that's basically what we're looking at today. And we're going to look at the two images, same two that we worked with last week. And let's move on into the darkroom and let's do some printing and see how this works. So before we start printing, I want to go over the chemical setup here so you can see what everything is and what I'm using here. Basically, trays that will accommodate up by 8 by 10. Basically, the red tray is developer. I've got a fixer over here, and then I've got 2 water baths. I'm going to explain why I have it set up. It's a little unconventional from the standard darkroom setup. For a developer in here, I'm using ethyl, and this is a really nice developer because depending on the dilution, you can get a different look to the print. So I'm actually diluted this 1 part developer, 4 parts water, which gives us a very warm tone, even mixed with our warm tone paper. I'm really going for something that is, you know, it's nice, feels saturated, is warm. You can also, if you develop it differently, can get colder tones or more neutral tones as well. So, and granted, you got to remember, if you're not familiar with darkroom stuff, this is different than toning. This is just, it's basically the tone of the black and white that it's giving you on the paper. And so I like a warm tone, that's why we're going with this. For fixture, I'm using TF4 from Photographer's Formulary, and I've talked about that in other episodes before. If you haven't seen those, not to spend too much time on this, but basically it's an alkaline fixer, which means you do not use a stop bath with it. You're going to use a water bath. So basically what I'm going to do is I go from developer and actually go to the sink for the first rinse. Then I'm going to come into the fixer and it stays there for a little bit, and then I have 2 water baths to kind of hold prints while I'm doing more so I can continue to work. So that is the basic setup for what we're doing here, and we're going to go ahead and look at the enlarger and how we've got that set up as well. Okay, so really quick, this is going to be the enlarger setup. I've got my mobile darkroom, so it's the enlarger on the cart. We've wheeled it in here. I've got everything hooked up through my timer, so we can use that. Negative trays in the carrier right now. And what I'm going to do is we're going to actually use the Ilford multigrade. I've got a 5 on here right now. I'm going to bump that down to about a 3, which is what I want to use. So basically these multigrade filters just pop right in, and they hang underneath the lens. Once you have that focused up, you make sure it's centered and ready to go. So that is what we're going to do to control contrast. And the other thing I'm using is, this is probably my favorite photo paper for the darkroom. This is Ilford MGFB, which is a multigrade fiber tone and is a warm tone paper. It is multigrade, which means it will work with the Ilford multigrade filters, and it also means that fiber based paper, you deal with curling issues, but it is a heavier paper. It has a nice tooth to it, a nice texture. This is a non-glossy, just using a matte finish on this, and it's a semi-matte actually, to be specific. And this is probably my favorite paper ever made for the darkroom. It is not cheap. You don't want to mow through it. If you're starting out, I don't recommend starting with something like this. I recommend using Arista papers or something like that, where you can get them. They're much more affordable until you kind of learn to know what you're doing and you're not going through as many prints to get one that works. Just know that that can be a big factor in the darkroom, but the way around that is to use paper that's less expensive. So anyway, what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set this up, and we're going to approach each negative and talk about what we're doing with the print. Okay, so we're looking at our test print here, which is coming up in this water bath here. And I want to say a couple things about this. You know, obviously the reason you do this, for our purposes here, I've went ahead and used a full sheet of paper. Now, however, you can get away with using a half sheet or so. It just depends. I mean, people will argue on this. Just make sure that you've got, whatever your test strip is, if you're only going to use a strip of this, that you've got a good range of the exposures, and then that will get you in the ballpark. And of course, you learn how to read these after a while, and they make, you know, total perfect sense. But essentially, I was moving, you know, my cover sheet down in 10-second increments. So we had this stop down to F22, and within the course of 1 minute, I moved every 10 seconds. So the darkest area was the area that got exposed the longest, obviously, and then the lightest area was the area that got exposed the least. Now, I did this for exaggeration. I knew that it was not going to be, you know, the range is somewhere in the middle. So this first band up here was the full 60 seconds. Second band was 50, 40, 30, 20, and then finally 10 on the last one, which you can see is not enough to properly expose, you know. What's interesting is to see the curve, the drastic difference between like 10 and 20, for instance, and then you get less of a difference as you start going up. But what I'm looking at here is really 60's too dark, 50's still too dark, 40, I'm looking at either 30 or 40, and I will make a print of each one of these so I can kind of see what the differences are. And judging based on that, we're probably going to do a little bit of burning, but I don't know. I mean, this image is pretty contrasty as it is. And so, you know, the issue I'm going to have is getting enough localized contrast in this white flower here. It may just kind of be dark, and it may be okay. I don't know. Well, that's one of the things we're going to find out when we do this. So that's what a test exposure strip, or in our case, an exposure print, looks like. And what that does is that gives us an idea for how long the exposure is. Like I said, once you've done this a couple times, you know basically ballpark, judging by the density of the negative. You know your paper, you know your enlarger, and you know more or less what you're dealing with. And you know, even still, I will do this because you're never going to guess it perfectly the first time. There are ways of, you know, scientifically measuring these with densometers and things like that, but we're not doing that here. This is kind of old school eyeballing. Okay, so what we've got here is I've got the negative framed up on the board about the size I want it printed. And I just want to show you a few things that we're looking at with the negative. First of all, remember these tulips back here are pretty much completely black. And as you can see, a lot of this area is so dense on the negative. It's really not letting, or it is actually letting most of the light through on the negative side. On the positive side, this will translate into dark because it's actually exposing the silver on the paper. Whereas this flower in the middle, our little, our white one, is going to actually have more texture. You can see there's more value in there, and it is darker down to this point. So this will be the lightest part of the image. Now, this image is underexposed, so we're probably gonna have to play with it a little bit, and I don't know if there's much we can do with it to still keep that kind of moody look that I like that it's getting. So we'll just kind of do some straight prints and compare them and check that out and see how this works. One thing that's also worth noting here is I am going to use one of the Ilford filters here. And so we're going to knock that over. And what you want to do is just make sure you don't have, like, you know, I've done this before where you print, you have a big old blob in there. So just make sure it's centered over and not creating weird shadows or anything. And now we're about ready to print. Okay, so I've timed this out. We're going to go ahead and do this first print at 30 seconds and see if this is going to be enough exposure. I'm not going to do any burning or dodging at this point. We're going to probably keep these prints fairly straight right now, mainly because this one I think is going to be a little bit challenging to work with. So I've set the timer up, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the switch, and it will turn the lamp off automatically within 30 seconds. So we'll go ahead and start that up. One thing I might do on the second round here is, and this is just the nature of a negative carrier, but the corners, I know it's probably impossible to tell from the video, just don't get as much light as some of the rest of the image. So sometimes it is important just to burn those in a little bit, just because it's the physics of the way the negative carrier sets up and the way light travels through it. I generally have had issues with that in the past, and that might be solved by another source. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and finish this out here, and it's time to go ahead and put this in the chemicals and see what we got. Okay, so I've done 2 prints here, and just because I wanted to get to the point here, I did not film the process of each one, but I'm going to tell you what I did. This first print looks okay. For me, I knew this was going to be a dark image because remember, this is the one that was not exposed correctly in the camera. I had the flash on the wrong setting, but on the context sheet, it did look like I could do something interesting with this, which I think is being achieved. One thing I've noted on here, well, there's 2 things I'll show you. First of all, it's not quite as much contrast as I want. I want these to be darker in these kind of, you know, looming areas in here. And the other thing I did to compensate here is typically on the enlarger, just because the way the light is hitting the negative and the negative character, you do want to burn your corners in, and I burnt them a little too much. And I don't know if you're going to be able to pick this up on the video or not, but it's kind of like a weird vignetting on here that just doesn't work. So I did a second print, and what I did on the second one is I simply moved my contrast filter up a half a step, and it made a pretty big, sorry, this was a full step, it made a big difference. So you can see this print is a little closer to what I thought I could do with this. I still wish I could get this flower in the middle brighter, but it's, you know, it's going to require some more work, and I may get there eventually, but this is pretty close, and I am liking this. What's interesting is, if you remember when we did the digital scans, we have this little dark area that's actually on the negative. It's where the background got moved, and it doesn't bother me as much on here, and the tonal range is just going to be different, you know, in an analog setting like this than it is going to be in a digital one. So I'm not going to bother to burn in this top corner like I did on the digital one. And we're going to see how these hold up when I compare them when we get the digital prints back from Adorama and compare them to the darkroom prints. And like I said, we're not really going for one is going to be better processed than the other. We're just looking at what the differences are, and, you know, which is more desirable to you, and that may differ. Neither is better than the other. So anyway, what we're going to do now is move on to the second print, which was exposed correctly. And let's, it should be a lot easier to print than monkeying around with these where I'm doing multiples. But anyway, we're going to head and move over and see how that comes out. Okay, so we're ready to print the second image now, which is our lily. And this one is going to, you can just tell by looking at the negative here that when I put paper under here, this is going to print a lot easier than the other one, because the concept on this was very simple. You're going to have a white background, so you can see the negative is pretty dense in these dark areas, which will prevent the paper from being exposed as much and leave it white. And then the lighter areas, because it's a negative, will be what becomes burned into the image. So you can see how this cow lily is going to sit. Now what we're going to do is actually move the contrast filter over it. So we're going to get more contrast out of it, which is kind of a magenta because it's blocking certain colors. I don't know if this is easy to pick up on the camera or not, but you can see in the corners here, this is just the way the negative carrier is set up. You just, less light gets into these corners. So it's typical that you want to burn into them. I'm not going to worry about on this, and this is why, because you don't want to burn. This is a white background, so if anything, I'd probably want to dodge in on these sides and just prevent that from being exposed. But we're just going to print this flat and straight. We can make those adjustments later. We just want to see what this process is. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll have a look. Okay, so we have the paper out and down, and I know this is hard to film everything in the dark, but you're going to get the idea. We should have a little red light coming in from our safe light. So we're going to go ahead. I've got my timer set up for 20 seconds. Make sure that it is indeed set. Actually, we're going to go 25 on this and see what happens. So let's go ahead and hit the light here, and I'm going to time that out and watch it, and we'll see how this works out. What we'll probably end up doing is, depending on how this light this comes out, I could probably add a little more time to this. I did do a test strip on this as well, and it was just kind of a toss-up to decide which. In fact, it was probably somewhere in between, so I'm probably going to make a 5-second increment to end this, and we'll see what that looks like. All right, so we've made some prints of the lily image here, and I want to look at these and let's compare them and see how they came out. This first one is okay. It's about what I expected. It's kind of the correct exposure, but it's too flat. I don't like what's going on in here. This is a little bit a matter of burning and dodging, but at this size, I mean, we're talking, I mean, this is some really small burning and dodging at 8x10. I think at a much larger size, we could work more on that. So what I did is I bumped the contrast filter up half a notch on here, and we got something that was a little bit darker, and this is a little more usable. And what's interesting too is if you start looking at this, probably what I should have done when I shot this is put an extra flash on the background so it would go even more white and make the negative more dense, because I am getting, you can see where the border is here, where the image is. I wanted to be white, but I wanted more contrast within the lily. So it's just, note to self for next time, I would shoot it that way to make one less step in the end result. Is if you want something to go bright white, go ahead and make it more dense on the negative, which means put a flash on it to bounce it in real life. And then finally, here's my last one, which I just adjusted about 5 seconds down. And I think this is pretty usable. This is one that we're going to tone. And I think that's going to be pretty interesting too, to see, what comes out of that. So, all these are workable, but small differences, to me are pretty big. And I think the tonality is working out in this one. I think I'm fairly happy with it. And I think that's one we're going to go ahead and go with. So what we're going to do next time, in the next episode, I should have my digital prints back from Adorama. And we're going to compare these to see how close they are, what the differences are. My gut feeling is that they're going to be pretty different. And it's just going to be interesting to see how that works, what that looks like. Is it, it doesn't, different necessarily means one better than the other, but I'm really interested to see what those differences are. I mean, clearly the paper's going to be a big difference, but then again, the other ones between Photoshop and digital process should be a lot more interesting as well. So anyway, next time we're going to check that out and compare them. Okay, so that is basically an inside look at the analog darkroom process for making silver gelatin prints. And a couple things I want to note on this that I think are important. One of the reasons that I'm particularly drawn to a lot of this myself is that it's not on a computer. I know that sounds maybe weird to some of you, but I think just about everybody works on a computer way too much these days. And the last thing I want to do at the end of the day when I've been on a computer most of the day is spend more time there with my images. And there's something about working with my hands and that whole process that I really love. Now, it is a little more foreign, it's a little more difficult, it's more labor intensive, there's stuff to clean up afterwards, but in the end, I believe that the images are really worth it to me, and that's why I prefer to do this. Now, I don't do it for everything. Obviously, there are things you need quicker turnaround on, or really, for whatever reason, do need to be digitally printed, or even digitally captured for that matter on a digital camera, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is not a this versus this kind of situation. I'm just giving you my reasons for really enjoying the darkroom. What we're gonna do next week is I want to look at our prints side by side, because I think that's where the real proof in all of this exploration is going to be. And what I want to do is we'll have our prints back from Adorama by then, and I want to compare those side by side with the darkroom stuff that we printed off today, and just look at them and compare the differences. I don't think I'm expecting to find one superior to the other. I think there are going to be qualities and characteristics and ease of use and reasons why, maybe they're both in your palette or your toolkit as a photographer. And, Anyway, so all that to say, let me know if you've got any questions, drop me a line, leave a comment. I'm going to refer back, or I have referred back to some older shows today that we've done. If you want to see the show links to that, you can see the show links. I put notes basically with every episode on our main website, which is theartofphotography.tv. And anyway, go check it out. Join us on Facebook, join us on Twitter, join us on Flickr, whatever your social media of choice is. We're on all of them. And that's about all I got for today. And I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.